Good morning. I'm Mark Allen with Gaper.io, and I'm here today with John Sillings and John Friel, the co-founders of ArtinRes. Good morning and good afternoon, gentlemen, in one case.
Hey, Mark. Nice to meet you.
Good morning.
Thanks so much for having us on.
Well, thank you for joining me. So can you share a brief background of yourselves and your work experiences?
Sure. Well, I studied economics and philosophy in university, and then I worked in finance as an equity analyst for about 8 years. And then a few years ago, I quit my job to start ArtinRes with John Friel.
And John, what's your background?
Growing up, I had kind of two competencies. I was sort of like a math nerd, but I also was really good at drawing. I chose to go to art school. And for several years, I was a struggling young artist in New York City. And when it was hard to kind of make rent, I taught myself to code. And so for the past 10 years, I've been a full stack web developer. And I've mostly worked remotely and have made things for clients in working on something that's kind of like adjacent to art or art itself.
Interesting. So both sides of your brain are functioning.
Maybe, yeah, it might be sort of like a dumbbell shape or something where all the other stuff in the middle is missing, but I could do those two things.
Tend to be more logical. I forget which side of the brain that is. The creative side isn't quite there for me. So my daughter got that. So what has been your?
They can be developed.
Yeah. What has been both of your experiences with remote development? And obviously, John F., you've had more than John. I would assume John S. Go ahead.
It's pretty extensive. I actually have very little experience with non-remote development. I've only been in-house for one brief stint. Well, I was in-house at a design company for about 2 years. And it was great, but the kind of like autonomy of being remote and running my own little one-person dev and design shop has really been a pretty good fit for my disposition.
Interesting. And John S., how about yourself?
So when I was working on Wall Street, the companies I worked for were pretty resistant to any sort of like work from home arrangements or like remote work. It was sort of like culturally frowned upon, I would say. I think a lot of that probably came from the top. We, like the senior folks that were our bosses, weren't like super comfortable on computers, and like also process wise, there wasn't really much like, I guess, like oversight for remote work. So there was this sort of like cultural understanding that like if you were working from home, you weren't really like having like a full capacity workday. So it was pretty rare. But since we've started ArtinRes, we do a lot of remote work, and we built the company, to basically handle remote work. And I think it's great. I mean, lifestyle wise, I really, really hate commuting. So that's like a major plus for me.
Yes. And John F., you're in San Francisco now, I know. So it makes a big difference commuting in the Bay Area. I can tell you for a fact.
Yeah, I believe it. My frame of reference is actually pretty strange. I have almost no knowledge of what it's like to have to commute to work. So I don't even really know what I'm escaping.
If you were to commute under normal circumstances in the Bay Area, figure at least an hour to get anywhere in the morning, and really? You lose 2 hours a day. And there's people that lose more than that. It's amazing. So what do you gentlemen think is the future of remote employment, and what do you think can be done differently to make it more effective?
I think a big part of it is some of the process stuff I was alluding to earlier. So there are lots of software tools that help with this. For instance, like Tandem, where you can sort of like, even Slack, just being able to talk to your teammates quickly and sort of be aware of what everyone else is working on. That was a thing that was really missing from the sort of like bigger financial institutions I was working for. I think that's essential. I mean, accountability is just a different ballgame when you're working in an office versus working remotely.
Yeah. And what about yourself, John F.? What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with that completely. Accountability is so important. I'm mostly super happy with working remotely. I have one reference experience of having a solo project, for which I'm really the only accountable party. And with that, I have gotten myself into sort of like a bad psychological state where I wasn't working on it enough and I think probably the main piece that was missing was needing some other external source of accountability.
Hmm. I've been doing remote work for 10 years now, and I've had remote developers under me. My opinion is that people are more productive at home if they have the discipline, right?
Mm-hmm.
At work, you really are concerned about looking busy as opposed to being busy if you're at the office. Now, not everybody, but you know what I mean. I think if you've been in an office environment, you know what that's like.
I think that's right. I mean, we all have our own like different sort of like processes, like personal rhythms to how we work. Like I've used Pomodoro before. Now I use something called Motion, which actually a Y Combinator batchmate of ours developed. But I think that taking breaks is actually pretty healthy. Working in sprints is something that personally works really well for me. But you can't really do that in an office. Like you can't go on YouTube for 10 minutes to take a break. People are going to be pretty upset with you if you do that, once an hour. But working from the privacy of my own home, I can do that and actually just like sustain. We work pretty long work days, so it's important.
I've noticed that a lot of people that work from home actually have to set an alarm to stop working.
Yeah, sure.
And we've all been there. I've done it. When things get back to normal, I actually go to my gym at 5:30 every night. Just get out of the house and do something, physical, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Totally.
tell me the story about ArtinRes. What do you guys do? What's your product? Who do you serve? All those things. And what's the journey been like?
John, do you want to take that?
Sure. We're a marketplace, and we connect artists who don't have a gallery representing them with buyers who don't have experience navigating the gallery system. So there's this enormous world of artists out there who are making work, and they need someone to help them sell it, and tons of people who are interested in buying it. And we create an easy way for those two types of people to get in touch with each other. John and I started the project as a nights and weekends thing with a couple other friends. And John, what was it, 2 years ago at this point? 1.5 years ago, we went full time.
Oh, wow.
And we recently went through Y Combinator, which is why I'm still out here in the Bay Area. John headed back to the East Coast to be closer to his family in the lockdown.
Interesting. So you're basically a virtual art gallery. Is that a good way to describe it?
It depends on what aspect of an art gallery you want to emphasize. So one of the functions that art galleries perform is sort of curatorial vision, and that usually has a sort of limited scope. So maybe an art gallery will work with a ceiling of maybe 20 artists. And we have capacity for, we actually curate pretty rigorously, but the number of artists can be much, much larger than that. So we're like a digital art gallery, but the digital nature makes us different from a gallery.
Yeah. So. And another major difference is that we're really focused on accessibility and like growing the demand side of the art market. So one thing that we do, a really important feature that we offer is buying artwork in installments, which just breaks up this big sort of like scary sticker shocky purchase price into manageable pieces.
Very interesting. Yeah. So how did you guys incorporate the idea of remote at your company? You said you built it 2 years ago, I'm assuming, in part-time. So I'm assuming you're remote then. And are you still 100% remote?
So at the very, very beginning, and John, I think you should speak on this a bit because it's really interesting from like a labor arbitrage cost perspective. John was in Berlin for a while. And like when we were just sort of like ideating in the early days, that's where we started. And then we had our own apartments. We didn't have an office to sort of like be as lean as possible. So today we use Clubhouse, which is like a project management software. We use Slack. Obviously, we're on email all the time. We use Superhuman for that. And then we've got some other sort of like software tools that just sort of like help with accountability. We use Zoom to do our daily check-in. So yeah, we sort of like, I don't know, always sort of like had a finger on the pulse of like what software tools we could really use to just like make the process seamless. And I think like early on, it was more about just like we couldn't afford an office, and it didn't feel like
Mhm.
worthwhile to get the the WeWork membership or whatever.
Mhm.
But now it feels like more of a cultural thing that just like works for us as a company.
Hmm. Interesting. And do you currently have an office or not?
No office.
We've never had an office.
Oh.
We did for a while move in together.
Yeah, we did do that. and that was sort of like living in an office, but
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, you're working at home all the time, then, right?
yeah.
Nothing like 9 o'clock at night, an idea hits. Oh, hey, let's go do this, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So the ongoing pandemic has forced a lot of companies to go remote. You guys obviously were already remote. Did that cause any roadblocks or challenges that you didn't expect?
I wouldn't say so. It was honestly kind of business as usual for us.
Mm.
I don't know, John, did you notice?
I do think that there's maybe something, I'm not actually sure how to characterize it yet, but there might be something a little bit intangible that, something about being in the same physical space together that I do actually think has some kind of benefit. I don't think it's necessarily the type of thing that would make or break a company being effective, but there was something about maybe sharing the downtime in between periods of work together, like having a meal together or just kind of breaking into a casual conversation that we do still certainly get a decent amount of that through working remotely. And I think working remotely is great, but
Right.
I miss that a little bit.
Yeah, just
our
that
current
human touch from time to time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
the sort of like COVID thing that I have been thinking about quite a bit, and I'm sure John has too, is just sort of like what the lasting effects of this may be. Like, I'm particularly, I think, sensitive to it just because of that like dynamic with the financial companies I worked for and how they like hated work from home. And now everyone's sort of like it's been like everyone's sort of been like forced to work from home now, and I think acknowledge that it actually works really well, at least for some people. So I'm hoping that there is a sort of like cultural shift in some industries that like aren't as comfortable with the idea.
I think it's going to go to a hybrid model after this, where people are going to work from home some and work at the office some. For the companies that were reluctant, I mean, companies that are already remote, it's no big deal. Most of the challenges they say are personal; they're not technical.
Yeah, that sounds super persuasive to me.
Yeah.
Another thing too is, so like I'm up here in upstate New York. I lived in New York for 10 years. It is so much cheaper here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it is ridiculously less expensive to live here. And the quality of life might actually be better in a lot of respects.
Yes.
So, that seems like a real opportunity. I mean, John, what was living in Berlin like?
It was really amazing. And there were even other cities. I spent 6 months bouncing around different places in Europe, working remotely in 2017. And it was certainly true that, I had reached a point with one of my projects where it provided a steady source of recurring revenue that I could not live off of in a city like New York or San Francisco, but I could actually have a really amazing quality of life in a city like Vilnius, Lithuania is one place that I went. Berlin, it was a more commonly known city. Budapest, Hungary. These were cities where I could afford a flat to myself in kind of like the posh city center.
Yes.
Whereas in a place like New York or San Francisco, I would have had to make pretty substantial sacrifices to my quality of life on the same amount of money.
Yes, and to give you an idea, perspective, I've lived in both of those areas. When I sold my house in Western New York, the total amount I sold my house for was less than the down payment I paid for my house in San Francisco.
I will believe that for sure.
So that gives you a perspective, and then you would not believe what my place in San Francisco goes for right now. So let's just say it's 7 digits. So, and it's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo.
Yeah. Sounds right.
Yep. If you've been here, you know what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
So there's companies like Gaber that help develop and build products for startups. How important do you think this is going to be going forward for companies like yourself that, need to hire the right people and quickly?
Really important. I mean, especially when we're talking about like the kind of like explosive startup growth and dealing with stuff on the demand side where, whatever sort of like MVP you hack together without, a proper like testing suite isn't, it is going to like start like tearing at the seams. That is where I would imagine we would need to transition to something. We're not quite there yet, but and we have John, who's incredibly talented, and Dan, who's does front end and design for us, who is also incredibly talented. So I feel like we're in a pretty good spot, but with scale comes the need for things like that.
Yeah, scale and availability make all the difference in the world. I mean, you guys know. I don't know if you are you guys 5'9" or not.
Are we what?
Well, that's all right. 5'9" means you're available 99.999% of the time. You are up and running without incident.
Oh, we actually we don't track our uptime, but it's pretty high.
I'm sure it is. Yeah, but when you get to be an enterprise application, you're only allowed to be down 5 minutes a month.
Sure.
Considered enterprise. So that's a whole different ballgame. Well, guys, this has been fascinating. The two Johns, it's been great talking to both of you. I wish your company well. I hope, and I wish your artists good luck. I'm just curious, did the virus actually increase your volume because there were more people at home?
There have been spikes and valleys. It's hard to say that they're correlated perfectly with the beginning of the pandemic. They seem to track more with things like press events and different kind of like internal initiatives on our end.
Yeah, we're growing nicely, but the attribution, virus or not, is kind of hard to fine point on.
All right. Well, I want to thank you again for your time today, and have a great day.
Thank you very much.
I'm here.
All right. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.